Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.
Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam ha'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Yotzer or uvorei choshen, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol.
Our reading from Genesis is from chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you.
Having people from three traditions talk to each other can sometimes get dicey. And one of the places that we often begin is with the story of Abraham, because Abraham is a character all three of our traditions share and trace a lot of our stories from. It's also a complicated story, because there are two sons that play the role in the story of Abraham. There was Ishmael, who was the son of Abraham and Hagar, and there was Isaac, who was the son of Abraham and Sarah. And what happens to those two helps shape the stories of our traditions. And there's different stories.
One thing that people should understand is that there isn't one particular Jewish understanding of this story. That the Jewish tradition has a rich interpretive tradition which is extra-biblical, and it starts almost as soon as the Bible is promulgated, or at least the Torah is promulgated, and continues even through today. Isaac is in the Jewish understanding, Isaac is a bridge. Isaac bridges the generations. Isaac maintains these new traditions from Abraham and passes them on to Jacob.
From a feminist interpretation of the story, what does this mean? Well, I said to Jonathan the other day, we were talking about the story, I said, you know, most of the time when you read the Torah, you don't know, was this particular story written by a man? Was this particular story written by a woman? But this story, I can tell you definitively, was written by a man. No woman would ever have written this story, and the story could not have been written about Sarah. Because can you imagine God going to Sarah and saying, I want you to sacrifice your son, your only son, whom you love, even Isaac. And her answer would be, after 9 months of pregnancy and 26 hours of labor, are you out of your mind?
Neither Abraham or Sarah ever speak to God again after this story. And the next thing that we hear about Sarah is that she's dead. So what does this mean about, has God asked Abraham to do this? Has Abraham misunderstood something that God has said to him? Is this ritual? It's a hard thing to figure out, but it leaves it open for us to interpret as we will what this meant for Abraham and Sarah's relationship. And I think it's important to note that Isaac doesn't come down the mountain with Abraham either. He comes down alone.
This story, according to the Islamic tradition, tells us about a man of God who, even when he has a vision, a dream of sorts, his translation is, this is a message from my Lord, and I need to think it through and even act on it, and he was willing to act on it. No loving man will take his child and simply say, oh, sounds good, we'll go to the mountain, we'll take care of business. So it's a huge test to the faith of Abraham. And he doesn't just act on it in secret, nor does he drag his boy up the mountain and say, well, let's do something. The story in the Quran says, he told his son, this is the vision I had, what do you think? He engages his son in the idea of what is your faith, what is your thinking, what are your feelings? And the response, which is just as symbolic, is, do that which you are commanded, you shall find me by the will of God, ever so patient.
I think one of the interesting dilemmas for a lot of us who struggle with this story is, what does it say about God? What kind of God, as Mommy suggested, would say sacrifice your son? What does this tell us about God? Oh, sure, pass it on.
It tells us that no matter what happens, Allah, that's God, knows what He always plans, and knows that sometimes we may not accept what He is asking us. But He tells us that even if you don't know now, it may be revealed to you in the future. You will know about it. So He is all-knowing, and He does not command something that is not for our benefit to us. And all those stories of the prophets before Muhammad is being told by Allah that we have told you all those stories so that you persevere, so that you know that you are not the first one to have encountered these difficulties.
Just a word about how this is played out in the Christian tradition, because it really is a story that comes out of the Jewish and then later the Islamic traditions of telling the story of Abraham. Within Christianity, there's been a looking back at interpreting this story, which has also been troublesome, I think, within the Christian world. Because sometimes Isaac is seen as a symbol of Jesus later being sacrificed. And so you have God sacrificing God's son in the Christian story. So this connection has been strong within Christianity, and I think it's one of the things Christians struggle with, in the notion, why would God demand the sacrifice of a human? God rejected the sacrifice of a human with Isaac or with Ishmael. Why would God then demand the sacrifice? Did Jesus' life and death have some other meaning than simply God sacrificing God's own son?
I think it tells us less about God than it does about how the ancient people understood how the world worked. And the world was a scary place, and bad things happened, and bad things happened to children. And they needed some kind of comfort. And their comfort was, even though bad things happen, and bad things happen to children, ultimately we can look for comfort in God and our faith in God, that somehow it'll be all right in the end. And it isn't always all right, and still today we know bad things happen, and sometimes it isn't all right. But we can gain some comfort and some strength from our faith and from each other.
To add to that, Bonnie said very well that when we think we hear God's voice telling us to do something, we should question it. I would add to that, I think we should measure it against our understanding of who God is and who God is calling us to be in the world too. I think when people act on what they think God is calling them to do without that questioning or without that measurement is when it becomes dangerous in our world and in our human family.
I'd like to offer the traditional Jewish blessing, what we call the priestly blessing that's found in the book of Numbers. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May the Eternal bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. May the Eternal cause the divine countenance to shine on you and be gracious to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Eternal shine the light of heaven toward you and give you peace.
ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Oh Allah, do not lead our paths astray after you have guided us. Oh Allah, give us the good in this life and in the hereafter.
May the God who dances in creation, who embraces us with human love, who shakes our lives like thunder, bless us and drive us out with power to fill the world with her justice. Amen.
Amen.